So it is that time of year again, time for another video about all the things that I learned last year. I find it useful to look back and reevaluate things, to remind myself of the diversity of successes, failures, and things I discovered as I head into another year of explorations into growing food. I also think that it's a useful way to summarize and to share with others and to help me figure out which direction I want to go with all the gardens. And I think this is especially useful this year, with the world changing so rapidly, and with some exciting new adventures just beginning. Over the years, I've been buying in a lot of municipal compost. This type of compost is made from a lot of woody material, so it's quite high in carbon, which makes it useful as a mulching compost, but not great for feeding vegetable plants. Last year, I experimented with supercharging a few bags of this compost, adding lots of concentrated nitrogen and other nutrients that seem to be deficient in the compost and in our soils. The gardens that I used this compost in had really good growth this year, better than I've seen in the past. So although there are issues, it seems to be possible to seriously amend this low-value compost to turn it into a higher-value feeding compost so that I can use it to grow more food. One of the issues with amending compost like this is where do I get the extra nitrogen from, as I need a lot of it to balance out the huge amount of carbon that it contains. The amount of high nitrogen biomass that I would need to add seems to be a lot of effort, and I'm not sure where I would get it all from. So some form of concentrated amendment seemed like the best option. There are organic possibilities, which are quite expensive and not so available, at least here in Ireland, but buying conventional soluble fertilizer from the local farm supply store was a lot cheaper and more convenient and possibly more effective. There are environmental issues with how this form of nitrogen is made, but I think that mixing it into the compost and letting it mature first reduces a lot of the issues that may be caused by adding such a concentrated form of nitrogen directly to the soil. I made the mistake of using some of this compost too early after amending it, before the biology had a chance to incorporate the added nitrogen in with the carbon. I had side dressed some young pepper plants quite early in the spring, and then we had a frost warning shortly after. So I covered the bed with horticultural fleece, which apparently trapped in some of the ammonia and other gases released from the compost, and some of the tender young leaves were burnt, setting back the plants. The faint smell of ammonia from the compost should have told me that this was going to be a problem. The kale plants I grew last year produced really well. These heavy feeding plants really enjoyed the nitrogen boost that they got where I used the amended compost, and from the other forms of fertility I added to the other gardens. It seems I had selected a really productive hybrid variety of kale, and I was able to provide these plants what they needed, and the weather seemed to have been quite good for these types of plants. I was able to harvest a lot of leaves over a long part of the growing season, and I wasn't able to keep up with the abundance, with a lot of the leaves ending up feeding the biology in the compost pile rather than making it into the kitchen. If I can get a crop of kale to consistently produce as well as they did last year, I can plant a lot less kale and have more space for other crops. The main crop of potatoes also grew a lot larger than expected. It might have been the abundance of fertility or the variety that I grew, but the stems of these plants grew really long last year, producing plants that were too big for the space I had given them. I had to pull the growth back into the bed a few times to give the plants in the next bed some space, and I was able to harvest a huge amount of potatoes from these overly vigorous plants, so all of the foliage ended up producing an abundance. While the kale, potatoes, and other heavy feeding crops produced really well, the onion crops suffered. Apparently, when onion plants get access to too much nitrogen in the soil later in the season, the developing bulbs can split. This was something I didn't realize was such an issue, but I saw a lot more of this damage last year in the gardens I had used the amended compost. It seems my great onion crops in previous years and in the other gardens this year had benefited when the fertility I had added at the beginning of the year started to run out by midsummer. I experimented with growing a few different varieties of bush or non-binding squash last year, and I was disappointed that they didn't produce more. This might have been because the squash plants were spaced too close together, or from too much competition from the neighboring potato plants, but I suspect that there weren't enough plants of each variety or type of squash for there to be sufficient pollination. So this year I need to either plan for more plants in a bigger space, or grow fewer varieties, or make sure that all the varieties are from the same compatible species to ensure that the bees can do their job. I grew different types of climbing bean plants both inside the polytunnel and outside to see what options are better for producing dried seeds for eating. The typical types of climbing beans that don't need pollination did a lot better in the warmer conditions inside, though still not great. But the runner beans that apparently benefit from pollination actually produce more seeds in the cooler and windier conditions outside, producing more than any of the climbing beans in the warmer conditions of the polytunnel. So if I want to produce lots of dried beans for eating, that seems like the best option, at least in this climate. I also grew broad beans inside the polytunnel, specifically to save seeds for growing and eating. This type of bean is much hardier than the other bean species and can easily grow outside, even through the frosts. But I was impressed by the amount of seeds that these plants produced under cover. They grew too big for the space I gave them and were a hassle to manage and harvest from, but they produced enough seeds to be a really viable crop. The seeds also dried earlier in the summer and were in better condition than what I would expect to be produced in the wet conditions outside. In the same bed of that polytunnel, I also saved seeds from spinach, carrots, onions, mizuna, and mustard leaf, with enough plants of each to ensure really good quality seeds. I felt that the polytunnel was a better space for saving seeds like this, mainly because we tend to get quite wet summers just as the seeds are needing to dry off. I did get a lot of seeds, more than enough, but there were problems with the plants growing too big and falling over, birds eating the seeds, and an infestation of mealybugs and spider mites. So there were issues, and the polytunnel may not have been the best option, and I have a lot more to learn, as I'm struggling to find ways to easily save lots of high-quality seeds in this climate. I didn't keep on top of the weeding in one polytunnel in 2023, especially under the sprawling determinate tomato plants, and I let some of the weeds go to seed. It must have been several generations of really fast-growing weed plants, because last spring a huge number of weed seedlings appeared in that area. It was a lot of work to keep up with the weeding, especially among the garlic plants, and it is probably going to be a hassle for years to come. But that is what I get for breaking the #1 rule of weeding, to never let a weed go to seed. A few years ago, I bought young plants of 4 different varieties of grapes, and I wanted to try an approach that I learned from a more experienced grower to grow them in large grow bags. I needed to prune the plants hard, move them into the polytunnel space for the growing season, then move them outside for the winter, and of course to feed and water them regularly. And I was able to harvest grapes last year, so at least I know it's possible to produce grapes in this cool climate using a method like this, if I can keep the birds and the mold away from the clusters of ripening grapes. I grew sweet potatoes in the polytunnel last year, and I was impressed how much bigger the roots that I pulled out of the large grow bags were compared to the mediocre yield from the plants growing directly in the soil. It seems these large black plastic grow bags allowed the main developing roots of the plant to warm up enough to make a big difference, while letting the longer feeding roots grow out through the holes in the bottom of the bag to colonize the cooler mass of the soil below. I was pleasantly surprised by the difference this made, and plan to grow all of the sweet potato crop in these bags this year. I also want to see if the heat-loving aubergine, pepper, and even tomato plants would also do better using a method like this to enable warmer roots. I rely on a fine netting as the primary line of defense against carrot fly, which has been one of the more problematic pests in the gardens. But this netting can be damaged, and I often found many holes in it, usually caused by the claws of larger birds that seem to enjoy perching on it. Thankfully, I found that most of these holes can be closed by simply scratching the netting to realign the thin plastic threads, or by gently tugging the netting in different directions. I'm not sure how big a hole needs to be for an adult carrot fly to be able to get into the crop, but I try to close them up when I can, to try to keep this expensive and essential barrier in good condition. While I've been more successful at reducing the impact of carrot fly, I am struggling with spider mites in a few of the polytunnels. This is a relatively new pest for me, and I haven't yet figured out the best way to reduce the impact of this pest, especially later in the season. I haven't been as attentive and proactive as I probably need to be more observant to the early signs of an infestation. Dealing with this pest is high on my list of priorities for the coming season, but I still have a lot to learn. Last year, I closed the community compost facility that I had been managing for years. I made a video about this, explaining that access to other sources of compost had made this homemade stuff less valuable for the gardens that I manage. And therefore I was less willing to put in the time and effort that it takes to process and remove all of the plastic and other material, the unfortunate stuff that seems to inevitably come along with any decomposable material that comes from households. I was surprised how many people commented on that video about how community projects always fail and that people are lazy and can't be trusted. While this may be part of the issue, I felt that my changing situation and my failure to keep up with the work that would always need to be done seemed to be lost in the discussion. Many people seem so quick to blame others, while I was blaming myself for not adapting, and I find that interesting. I have been managing this Red Gardens project for a long time, and even the larger growing space of the black plot was started about 7 years ago. I've had a lot of success and learned a lot, but I've consistently struggled to keep up with all the things that I wanted to do and to properly manage all of the gardens and other growing spaces that I had. I tried a number of different things over the years, including hiring a friend to help, but it has taken me a while to figure out how to move forward with all of this. And the world around us is rapidly changing, and I've been struggling to figure out how my own work and explorations might need to change in response. A few months ago, a new option or idea suddenly made a lot of sense, and a new collaborative adventure has already begun. I'm still going to keep the older family-scale gardens for more focused explorations, though there will be less of a focus on side-by-side comparisons. But the larger scale black plot, which has always been underdeveloped, has already become the home to the Black Plot Collective, or the BPC, and I think this is a really exciting and interesting development, and I'll talk a lot more about that in a future video. People who have been following this channel for a while will have noticed that I've been filming recent videos inside my house, rather than outside in the gardens or in the polytunnel. The main reason for doing this is to make things easier and to avoid the usual issues of having to schedule around too much rain or too much sun or too much wind and noise disruptions, which have made filming outside more difficult. I still have issues with sound quality in this unfinished space, something that I hope to improve in the near future. But filming inside is easier and more convenient and less likely to be interrupted. And I'm hoping this will help me make more videos this year, or at least reduce the amount of time and hassle it takes to make them. I think this is going to be an interesting year and a challenging one with a lot of changes, but I'm still going to try to make lots of videos like this that so many people seem to enjoy. If you like the videos that I make and value the explorations that I do, please consider supporting this Red Gardens project even more, either through Patreon or PayPal, but only if you can afford it. The links to both are in the description below. But more importantly, I wish you all a safe and productive season, and thank you for watching.